The morning sun broke through the misty canopy of the forest, like pale gold spilling across a hidden world. Birds called out in distant echoes, and somewhere far above, the wind whispered through the leaves, carrying secrets of the dense woodland. Mahi, Tanvir, Alan, and Bandon had entered this forest 10 days ago, seeking adventure, eager to escape the mundane, and yet unprepared for the sheer relentless challenge the jungle would offer. From the first hour, it was clear that survival was no simple task. The trees towered like ancient giants, their roots twisted into sharp arcs above the damp soil. Moss clung to every surface, giving the forest an emerald sheen, but also hiding dangers. Snakes coiled silently in the undergrowth, and shadows often shifted with the sinister suggestion of movement. Even the sunlight struggled to reach the forest floor, casting the world in a perpetual dim, filtered glow that made every step feel tentative. Mahi led the group at first, a young man with a keen sense for direction, but little experience with the raw cruelty of untamed lands. His eyes constantly scanned the tree line, marking landmarks and oddly twisted oak, a stream trickling in the distance, the faint smoke of unknown fires. Every decision carried weight. A misstep could mean losing their path entirely, getting trapped, or worse, facing predators that the forest held in quiet waiting. Tanvir carried most of the supplies, including the small canvas tent, rope, flint, and basic cooking tools. His hands were already blistered from the first few days of clearing paths, setting traps, and moving fallen logs. Each day, he learned something new: how to recognize edible plants versus poisonous ones, how to purify water with heat and patience, and how to move quietly to avoid startling the forest creatures that could mean danger. His natural curiosity kept him alert, but he also bore a sense of dread. Sometimes the forest felt like a living entity, watching, judging their presence. Alan was the strategist, always observing the way the light fell on the forest floor, the direction of the wind, and the faint tracks animals left behind. She would pause frequently, studying the ground, noting broken branches or flattened grass, signaling which way the streams and small rivulets flowed. She could track a deer for hours, noting patterns that suggested where water or food could be found. But she knew that tracking animals was only part of the survival puzzle. They needed shelter, warmth, and fire, things that could not be ignored if they hoped to last the 10 days. Bandon, the most cautious of the group, often acted as the voice of reason, while the others occasionally charged ahead, driven by curiosity or excitement. Bandon slowed them, making them assess dangers they might overlook. He reminded them constantly to mark their paths, to avoid creating circular loops in the forest where they could get lost, and to ration their food carefully. His careful approach often clashed with the impulsiveness of Mahi, but it was this balance that allowed the group to continue forward. On the first night, they discovered the true weight of the forest. They had built a small fire in a clearing surrounded by thorny underbrush. Smoke curled lazily into the night sky, a beacon of warmth in a cold, damp wilderness. But the forest did not sleep. Strange rustling sounds echoed from the shadows, the snapping of twigs, the distant cry of unknown creatures. Each member of the group took turns keeping watch, using sticks and torches to illuminate the darkness just beyond the fire's radius. Sleep was light, fragmented by the fear that any moment could bring a predator or worse. disorientation that could separate them from one another. By the second day, hunger began to gnaw at them. The forest was rich with life, but the knowledge to extract sustenance from it was limited. Mahi led the group to a stream where they attempted to fish with handmade spears. Tanvir tried to catch small game using traps fashioned from rope and sharpened sticks. Alan identified wild berries and edible roots, carefully avoiding those she suspected could be toxic. Bandon suggested combining their knowledge to create a makeshift system, traps along the stream, foraging zones for berries, and rotating night watches to conserve energy. Water was another constant concern. They learned to boil it before drinking to avoid sickness, a process that took hours each day and required careful attention to the fire. Collecting wood, building a hearth, and maintaining warmth became a full-time task, especially when rain threatened to extinguish their flames. On the third day, exhaustion began to show on their faces. Mahi's usual confident stride slowed. His legs ached, muscles stiffened from the rough terrain. Tanvir's hands were cut and calloused, but his eyes held determination. Alan's gaze grew sharper, scanning the forest not just for food, but for signs of shelter, for anything that could help them survive. Bandon, though weary, kept morale from collapsing. He reminded them to ration their energy, to conserve strength, and to remain vigilant. They discovered a small cave along a steep ridge on day 4. It was damp, but offered protection from the rain that had soaked them the previous nights. Mahi immediately cleared a small flat area inside, using stones to create a rudimentary hearth. Tanvir carried in firewood and debris. Alan examined the walls for signs of snakes or dangerous insects, and Bandon devised a system to ensure the cave entrance was monitored at all times. That night, the cave offered some comfort, though the darkness beyond it still felt alive with unseen eyes. Days 5 and 6 brought minor victories. They managed to catch small fish using handmade spears, identified edible mushrooms that grew near fallen logs, and even encountered a herd of deer that allowed them to observe for long enough to take notes on where to set traps. Their clothing was torn, their faces streaked with mud, their hair matted with sweat and rain. But they were learning the rhythm of the forest. Every day brought small lessons. How to move silently, how to hide scent from predators, how to gauge distance and direction without a compass. But the forest was relentless. On the 7th day, a sudden storm forced them to improvise a shelter using tarps and branches. Rain flooded their cave slightly, forcing them to sleep on raised areas. Thunder shook the trees, and lightning illuminated the forest in blinding flashes, casting shadows that looked like the twisted faces of monsters. Their fire was extinguished multiple times, and they were soaked to the bone. Each of them learned endurance in a way they never had before. By day 8, fatigue set in, but so did adaptability. They discovered ways to filter water using sand and leaves, to make improvised fishing hooks from bones and thorns, and to recognize the calls of birds and animals as warnings of nearby predators. They had begun to anticipate the weather, to understand subtle shifts in wind and humidity that hinted at storms, or the presence of larger animals. The forest was no longer entirely alien, though it remained formidable. On the 9th day, they encountered their first serious threat, a bear. Attracted to the scent of their small stock of fish, the group froze, hearts hammering in unison. Mahi whispered for them to remain calm, Alan suggested climbing nearby trees, while Tanvir tried to make noise to divert the animal. Bandhan reminded everyone to stay together. Slowly, carefully, using fire and movement, they managed to scare the bear away without confrontation. A lesson in patience and respect that burned itself into their memory. By the 10th day, the four friends had transformed. They were leaner, stronger, and more attuned to the pulse of the forest. Their laughter returned, quieter, but more genuine, interspersed with stories of the dangers they had faced, the small victories, and the near misses that had nearly ended their journey. They had learned how to forage efficiently, how to set traps and catch food, how to purify water and maintain warmth, and most importantly, how to rely on each other in an environment that tested every instinct. When the 10th sunset painted the canopy in shades of deep orange and violet, they sat together on a ridge overlooking the thick expanse of jungle below. Silence reigned, filled only by the distant calls of unseen creatures and the whispering wind. They reflected on 10 days of fear, learning, and survival. Mahi spoke first, his voice low but steady. "We made it. We learned more in these 10 days than most ever will, and we did it together." Tanvir nodded, holding a small fish he had cooked over the final fire. "I never thought we'd survive this long, but we did." Every day was a lesson, every night a test. Alan smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "And the forest, it taught us to respect it, to be patient, observant, careful." Bandhan leaned back against a tree, exhausted but satisfied. 10 days, and I feel like we've only begun to understand it. Tomorrow, we leave this jungle, but I'll never forget what it taught us or what it revealed about ourselves. They watched as the last light faded, the forest settling into the soft rhythm of nocturnal life. The jungle, once an enemy, now felt like a teacher, a living entity that had challenged them to grow, adapt, and survive. By the time they stepped out of the dense foliage the next morning, their clothes tattered, faces weathered, and spirits tested, they carried with them the knowledge, courage, and resilience that would remain with them forever. 10 days in the dense, untamed jungle had changed them from curious travelers into seasoned survivors, and the story of their journey would echo far longer than the forest itself. The morning mist clung stubbornly to the forest floor as the four friends approached the edge of a wide, roaring river. Its waters churned and foamed, rushing with a speed that spoke of hidden rocks and treacherous currents. The jungle seemed to grow taller and dense around them, as if warning them that this challenge was not to be taken lightly. Mahi stepped forward first, his boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. "This is bigger than I expected," he murmured. "We can't just wade through. The current will sweep us away." Tanvir studied the river with narrowed eyes. "We need a plan," he said. "Rushing in blindly will get one of us killed." He scanned the surroundings, noting the fallen logs along the bank, the vines that hung from trees overhead, and the shallow pools where the current slowed. "We can use those, maybe lash some logs together, or cross at the bend where it narrows." Alan crouched near the riverbank, tracing the patterns of debris and driftwood floating downstream. "See that?" she said, pointing. "The water slows just after that bend. If we time it, we might be able to use those rocks and the fallen tree over there as stepping points." Bandhan, arms crossed, surveyed the entire stretch of water. "We'll need ropes," he said, "and someone steady in the lead. If we all move at once, one misstep could drag the others with him." He looked at each of his friends. "This will test not just our strength, but how well we work together." They set to work immediately. Using vines they had collected earlier, Tanvir tied two long logs together, creating a crude raft-like structure. Mahi tested its buoyancy in the shallower section, carefully observing the balance and weight distribution. The raft tipped slightly and water lapped at the edges, but it held firm. "Good enough," Mahi said, stepping onto the logs cautiously. "I'll go first, hold the rope, and guide it across. Then the rest of you can follow." Alan tied a rope to the thick branch of a nearby tree, anchoring it as securely as she could. "Use this as a guide," she instructed. "Hold tight, and don't rush. The current will push, but the rope can steady us." The first crossing began slowly. Mahi inched across the makeshift raft, hands gripping the rope, feet balancing on the slippery logs. Below him, the water roared, its cold touch threatening to reach for him with every ripple. A sharp slip would send him tumbling into the river, and the thought made the friends' hearts pound in unison. Tanvir followed, carefully testing each step before moving the next foot. His hands clutched the rope so tightly that his knuckles whitened, but his focus never wavered. Alan and Bandon crossed after him, their movements synchronized, voices low as they offered guidance. "Step here, hold steady, move slowly," each instructional lifeline. Halfway across, the raft tipped suddenly when a hidden current snagged one of the logs. Mahi's heart raced as he fought to regain balance. "Steady," he shouted, and the others froze, bracing themselves. Using the rope and a sharp kick, he managed to stabilize the raft, earning a relieved sigh from his friends. The forest seemed to hold its breath as they reached the far bank, feet finally touching solid ground. The roar of the river faded slightly in the distance, replaced by the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant calls of birds. Wet, exhausted, but triumphant, the four collapsed onto the damp earth, laughter and relief mixing with the pounding of their hearts. This was close," Bandon said, panting. "If one of us had slipped, it could have been the end. But we made it, because we stuck together." Alan nodded, brushing mud from her leggings. "The river tested us, yes, but it also taught us something crucial. In this jungle, we're stronger as a team than as individuals. Alone, we would have been lost in moments." Tanvir leaned back against a tree, soaking in the moment. "And it's only the beginning. 10 days. Who knows what other challenges await us deeper inside." Mahi, ever the optimist, smiled despite the exhaustion. "Then we keep moving, step by step, river by river. We survive together, and that's all that matters." By the time they continued their journey, the river behind them had become more than just a physical obstacle. It was a testament to their coordination, patience, and the trust that now bound them together. As a unit capable of surviving the jungle's relentless trials, the dense forest ahead seemed darker, more menacing, but their spirits had lifted. The crossing had strengthened not just their bodies, but their resolve. They had proven to themselves that even in the face of natural fury, careful planning, teamwork, and courage could see them through. As they ventured further, Mahi, Tanvir, Alan, and Bandon began to notice subtle changes in the forest. The way the wind shifted, the calls of the animals, and the occasional footprint of creatures large and small. Every rustle in the underbrush could signal danger. Every bird call could be a clue to water or food. Their senses sharpened. Each day in the jungle became a lesson in observation and instinct. By nightfall, they had set up a small camp just beyond the riverbank, fire crackling and warming their chilled bones. They shared stories of near falls, whispered about the river's strength, and acknowledged, without words, that they had grown. The jungle, once an impenetrable challenge, now seemed like a teacher guiding them through a harsh but necessary curriculum. Mahi looked at the firelight dancing in their eyes and said softly, "Tomorrow will be harder, but we've learned something invaluable today. The jungle is testing us. Yes, but it also rewards those who pay attention, who work together, and who don't panic." Bandon nodded, adding, "We'll need that lesson in full measure if we want to make it 10 days. There's more ahead, steeper climbs, deeper thickets, and challenges we haven't even imagined." Alan stirred the small stew they had managed to make from fish and berries, the aroma filling the clearing. "Whatever comes, we face it as one. That's the only way to survive here." And so, with the river conquered and their trust in each other solidified, the four friends settled into a night of cautious rest. The jungle round them hummed and whispered, alive with unseen life, and the lessons of the first major obstacle, teamwork, patience, and vigilance, lingered as a guiding light for the days to come. The forest grew denser with every step they took. By the morning of the third day after crossing the river, Mahi, Tanvir, Alan, and Bandon had moved deeper into the jungle, where sunlight barely pierced the canopy, and the air was thick with humidity and the scent of wet earth. Every branch, every root, seemed alive, shifting slightly as though watching them, warning them. Their first priority was food. The river had provided small fish, but they needed sustenance that could last, and they had little in the way of supplies. Alan, always observant, led them to a patch of wild berries. She crouched low, examining leaves and stems carefully. "These are safe," she said. "Avoid the red ones, they're poisonous. The blue ones, the small clusters over there, those we can eat." Tanvir gathered the berries into a small woven basket he had made from vines. "Not much," he muttered, glancing at the dense jungle all round, "but enough to keep us from starving today." Mahi surveyed the surroundings, scanning for movement, listening for sounds that might indicate predators or prey. "We need protein too," he said. "Fruits alone won't keep us strong. Let's see if we can trap something." Bandon nodded, his eyes narrowing at the undergrowth. "Look for animal tracks, rabbits, deer, maybe even birds. We need to think smart, not just rush in." Hours passed as they tracked footprints through the moist soil, moving silently to avoid startling the creatures. The forest demanded patience. Every rustle, every snap twig could signal danger or opportunity. Alan spotted faint tracks near a shallow stream, a rabbit, judging by the size and pattern. They quickly worked together. Tanvir fashioned a small snare using cordage. Mahi positioned it with precision. Alan guided the rabbit's likely path, and Bandon kept watch for larger predators. By late afternoon, the snare had worked. A small, trembling rabbit was caught, its heart pounding in fear. Mahi approached carefully, whispering to the others, "Steady. We need to make this quick, humane, and efficient." With practiced hands, he ended the rabbit's life swiftly. That evening, they prepared a small fire. Smoke rose into the thick canopy, cautious enough to avoid attracting attention from larger animals, but sufficient to cook their cas. The aroma of roasting meat filled the air, blending with the earthy smell of the jungle. They ate in near silence, each lost in thought, reflecting on the effort and strategy that had gone into securing their food. Survival, they realized, was not a casual endeavor. It demanded intelligence, patience, and calm under pressure. The night brought new challenges. Sounds they had never noticed during the day became pronounced. The distant roar of a predator, the flutter of wings overhead, the sudden crack of branches in the darkness. Bandon insisted on setting small, improvised alarms, dry twigs tied loosely near their camp that would snap with weight or movement. They also created a perimeter with sharpened sticks driven into the ground to deter nighttime intrusions. During the night, rustling nearby suggested a wild boar. Tanvir gripped a sharpened stake, Mahi held a torch, and Alan whispered instructions. They waited silently, allowing the boar to pass without confrontation. It was not worth the risk. Some battles, Alan said, are not worth fighting. We pick and choose our confrontations carefully. The following days tested their endurance. On the fourth day, a sudden rainstorm drenched them completely. Fire was nearly impossible to maintain, and they had to huddle together under a thick canopy of leaves to avoid hypothermia. Their clothes, already worn and tattered, offered little protection. Tanvir's hands were raw from constant handling of wet wood and rope. Alan's hair was plastered to her face, and Bandon shivered in the cold, wet night. Yet, in these moments of discomfort, their skills sharpened. They discovered ways to use large leaves to shield themselves from rain, how to dig small trenches to prevent water from pooling at their sleeping area, and how to collect rainwater for drinking. Each problem the jungle presented forced innovation and cooperation. By day 6, they were adapting to the forest's rhythm. Birds became messengers, signaling movement of other animals. Insects guided them to water sources, and the slightest change in wind direction hinted at incoming weather. They foraged more efficiently, trapping fish with sharpened sticks in small pools, and using sharpened vines as hooks for small birds. The jungle, though still formidable, was becoming a teacher, and they its diligent students. On the 7th day, they encountered a snake while moving through thick underbrush. It was coiled, tongue flicking, a venomous glint in its eyes. Panic rose, but Bandon's calm instructions prevented disaster. "Do not panic," he whispered. "Step back slowly. Do not make sudden movements." Mahi backed away, guiding the others in unison. The snake, sensing no immediate threat, slid away into the undergrowth. It was a lesson in caution and observation, one they would not forget. By the 8th day, they began to notice signs of larger wildlife, claw marks on trees, distant growls, and footprints of creatures much larger than themselves. They realized the forest was not just a challenge of sustenance, but a complex ecosystem of predator and prey, of survival strategies extending far beyond human comprehension. On the 9th day, while collecting water from a small stream, they noticed the faint footprints of a deer leading to a hidden clearing. Carefully, they followed, using every lesson learned: silent steps, careful observation, and patience. From a distance, they saw the deer feeding. Tanvir whispered, If we move slowly, we might get another chance to trap one without startling it." Mahi nodded, and they set up a small snare, learning again that every successful hunt required preparation, timing, and precision. The 10th day brought reflection. Sitting together after a meager meal of berries and small game, they watched the sun filter through the dense canopy, painting the jungle floor in golden shafts of light. They realized that the 10 days had changed them fundamentally. They were no longer just curious travelers. They had become observers, strategists, survivors, and, most importantly, a team that could rely on each other under extreme conditions. Alan spoke softly, breaking the comfortable silence. "We've learned more than just survival. We've learned patience, respect, and the importance of understanding the forest's rhythms. We know now that every step, every choice matters." Bandon nodded, adding, "And that even when we are frightened, careful thought and teamwork can guide us through challenges we never thought we could face." Tanvir smiled faintly, exhaustion heavy in his body. "We'll leave this jungle stronger, wiser, and more capable than when we entered. 10 days may seem short to the world, but here, it has been an eternity of learning and growing." Mahi, looking at the shadows stretching across the dense trees, whispered, "The forest has been harsh, but it has taught us more than any classroom ever could, and together we've survived it." The forest around them remained alive, mysterious, and watchful. Every rustle, every distant call was a reminder that life in the jungle demanded vigilance, adaptability, and cooperation. And as night fell on the 10th day, the four friends huddled together once more, knowing that the lessons of the jungle would stay with them for beyond the borders of its dense, unyielding expanse. The forest gradually began to shift as the four friends moved deeper into the untamed jungle. The dense canopy gave way, revealing the first hints of the distant, jagged hills that stretched like sleeping giants across the horizon. Unlike the flat lowlands they had crossed before, these hills were steep, covered in thick underbrush and thorny vines that clutched at their legs and clothing. With almost malicious intent, the morning air was cool but heavy with humidity. Every breath felt thick, as if inhaling the forest itself, dense with the smell of wet leaves, moss, and the faint metallic tang of the soil after recent rains. The friends' footsteps were cautious, deliberate, trying to avoid hidden roots that might trip them or stones slick with moss that could send them tumbling down a slope. Mahi, leading the group, paused to scan the terrain. "These hills are tougher than anything we've faced so far," he said, his voice low, carrying a hint of both awe and apprehension. "We'll need to take it slow. One misstep here could cost us much more than a scraped knee." Tanvir adjusted the weight of his backpack, which had grown heavier with days of jungle supplies, water skins, and the remnants of their makeshift traps and tools. "We'll need to ration water even more carefully," he warned. "I've estimated we have barely enough for another 3 days if we don't find a stream." Alan squinted toward a steep ridge ahead. "We should look for natural paths, places where the incline is gradual. Climbing straight up will be exhausting, and the forest won't forgive carelessness." She began pointing out patches of firmer ground and ledges where the underbrush was thinner, creating what little path they could use. Bandhan, ever cautious, slowed his pace to match the terrain. "Watch your footing, and watch each other. If someone slips, The others need to be ready to grab them or redirect their fall. The climb began slowly. Every step required effort, pushing through branches, stepping over roots, and sometimes crawling on hands and knees to avoid a sudden drop. The forest was not quiet. The sound of leaves rustling, insects chirping, and distant calls of birds echoed through the hills, blending into a symphony that was both beautiful and ominous. By mid-morning, sweat was pouring down their backs, clothes sticking to their skin, and muscles burning from exertion. Tanvir paused, bending over to catch his breath, and mopped his forehead with a sleeve. "This is harder than I imagined," he admitted, his voice strained. "I knew hills would be challenging, but the jungle is relentless. It hides danger in every crevice." Mahi offered a short nod, wiping sweat from his brow. "We'll rest for a few minutes. Everyone needs water. And Alan, check the slope ahead before we continue. We don't want to get trapped in a dead end." Alan crouched low, using a branch to part the underbrush carefully. She moved forward a few meters, examining the terrain, listening for signs of animals or loose soil. "There is a small ledge about 20 meters ahead," she said after a moment, pointing. "If we take that, we can avoid a steep drop that could be dangerous." The friends moved cautiously, one by one, using vines as support when the ground gave way beneath their feet. Each misstep could lead to twisted ankles, scrapes, or worse. Yet, despite the physical strain, they felt a quiet exhilaration. The forest was testing them, but it was also showing them the thrill of survival, of teamwork, and of discovering paths where none seemed to exist. By noon, they reached a small clearing atop one of the lower ridges. The view was breathtaking. Rolling hills covered in dense green, the jungle stretching endlessly in all directions, broken only by occasional glimmers of sunlight reflecting off distant streams. The air was thick, but carried a faint breeze that rustled through the leaves, offering a brief respite from the suffocating humidity. Mahi took a deep breath. "We've come far, but this is just the beginning. We need to find water soon, and the higher we climb, the harder it will be." Tanvir pulled out a small water skin, passing it around. They drank cautiously, savoring the brief refreshment. Bandon began to plan the next steps. "From here, we follow the ridge. It's safer than cutting straight through the denser sections below. The higher we go, the better vantage points we'll have to spot streams and any dangers ahead." As they continued, the terrain became increasingly rugged. Steep slopes required careful balancing, and hidden hollows often forced them to detour or climb back over jagged rocks. Alan's sharp eyes noticed small tracks of wild pigs and deer, suggesting that food sources might be nearby, but also signaling that predators could be close. On the second day of climbing, they encountered a small cave tucked into a rocky outcrop. The opening was narrow, and the interior dark and damp, but it provided temporary shelter from the afternoon rain. The friends entered cautiously, scanning for snakes, insects, or other dangers. Tanvir lit a small torch made from soaked wood, illuminating the cave's interior. "This will do for tonight," Mahi said. "Not comfortable, but safe." They cleared out debris and rocks that could be hazardous and set up a small fire, taking care to prevent sparks from igniting the surrounding underbrush. The aroma of cooking fish and wild berries filled the cave, giving them a rare sense of comfort in the midst of the wild. That night, The forest outside seemed alive in ways they had not experienced before. Strange calls echoed off the cliffs. The rustling of leaves sounded almost like footsteps, and distant growls hinted at predators lurking in the shadows. Bandon insisted on creating a perimeter of sharpened sticks at the cave's entrance, while Alan placed small alarms made from twigs to alert them of movement. Sleep was light, fragmented by the fear and excitement of survival. They dreamed of falls, of being swept down slopes, of getting lost, but also of the thrill of discovering paths, finding food, and pushing themselves beyond limits. The following morning, they resumed the climb, navigating narrow ridges that overlooked sheer drops. Every handhold was tested, every step deliberate. They learned to trust the jungle's signs. The bending of branches indicated hidden rocks. The patterns of moss suggested which stones were stable, and the flight of birds warned of potential predators or disturbances. On the fourth day, they found a hidden waterfall cascading into a small pool. The water was clear, cool, and safe to drink after boiling. The discovery was both a reprieve and a lesson. The jungle was generous, but only to those who observed and respected its patterns. They filled their water skins, rested briefly, and collected small edible plants nearby. The fifth day tested their endurance further. They had to cross a particularly steep incline covered in slick moss. One misstep, and the fall could be deadly. Mahi led, testing each foothold. Tanvir followed closely, helping Alan when she slipped slightly, and Bandon brought up the rear, watching for hazards. It took hours, but their coordinated efforts ensured no one was injured. By the sixth day, the physical strain was immense. Blisters, sore muscles, and exhaustion were constant companions. Yet, the mental challenge was equally taxing. Every decision carried weight. Which path to take, how much food to ration, when to rest, when to push forward. The forest was not just a physical trial. It demanded strategy, patience, and constant vigilance. Alan spotted a nest of wild honeybees near a hollow tree. The idea of harvesting honey for sustenance was tempting, but risky. "We can try," she said cautiously, "but we need smoke, careful movements, and full awareness. One wrong step could result in stings that leave us incapacitated." Tanvir and Mahi quickly gathered damp leaves and small branches to create smoke. Bandon stood guard, watching the surroundings for predators. With delicate coordination, they approached the hive, the smoke calming the bees enough to collect honeycombs. It was a small victory, providing calories and morale for the group. The seventh day brought a thunderstorm. Rain lashed at their camp, streams turned into torrents, and winds howled through the ridges. They sheltered in a rocky outcrop, using large leaves to divert water, and monitored each other's condition to prevent hypothermia. Every task: lighting fire, preparing food, securing clothing became a lesson in resilience and adaptability. By the eighth day, they had grown more attuned to the forest. They could detect subtle shifts in the wind, the approach of animals, and even minor changes in terrain that signaled danger or opportunity. Their bodies were stronger, their instincts sharper, and their trust in each other unshakable. The ninth day presented a true test. A steep cliff with loose rocks and a narrow ledge required them to work together as never before. Tanvir went first, testing each step. Mahi held the rope tightly for support. Alan guided and checked for loose stones. Bandon brought up the rear, ready to stabilize anyone who slipped. Every movement was careful, deliberate, and in perfect coordination. On the 10th day, after nearly 2 weeks of relentless climbing and survival, they reached a plateau that offered a breathtaking view of the surrounding jungle. The forest stretched endlessly, a sea of green, broken only by winding rivers and distant hills. They stood together, exhausted, battered, but triumphant. Mahi broke the silence. "We made it. 10 days of the jungle, and we're still standing." Tanvir smiled faintly, holding a small catch of fish for the day. "We've learned more than we ever imagined. Not just survival, but patience, coordination, and respect for this place." Alan brushed a strand of hair from her face. "And the jungle has taught us that even when every step is uncertain, careful observation and team work can guide us through." Bandon looked out over the horizon, muscles aching, but spirit strong. "We'll leave this forest changed, stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever comes next." They rested atop the plateau as the sun set, the forest below alive with unseen creatures. The 10 days of climbing, surviving, and learning had forged them into not just explorers, but a team capable of facing the jungle's relentless trials. Every scraped knee, blistered hand, and sleepless night had become part of their collective story, an epic of resilience, courage, and the human spirit pushing against the raw force of nature. Scene 5. The morning sun barely pierced the thick canopy as Mahi, Tanvir, Alan, and Bandon prepared to leave the plateau they had reached the previous evening. The forest below was alive with distant roars, bird calls, and the faint trickle of hidden streams, each sound carrying both promise and danger. Their bodies were sore from the relentless climb, but the view had reinforced their resolve. They were now more aware of their surroundings, more connected to the forest, and more dependent on each other than ever before. Mahi led the group carefully down the slope, marking natural footholds and advising on the safest path. "Keep your weight low and your center steady," he whispered. "The ground is loose here. One wrong move, and we could slide down into the river below." Tanvir carried most of the supplies, distributing weight evenly across the group whenever the path required agility. Every step was calculated. Moss-covered rocks were avoided, loose soil tested with a stick, and vines used for balance. The jungle, though breathtakingly beautiful, was merciless to carelessness. Roots snagged their boots, insects swarmed around them, and the occasional animal growl reminded them that they were intruders in a land where survival was the ultimate law. Alan's eyes constantly scanned the underbrush, noting animal tracks and the direction of small streams that might provide drinking water. "There's a small rivulet to the west," she said softly. "It should lead us down to a safer path if we follow it carefully. The rocks around it are slippery, so we'll need to move one at a time." Bandon, always the cautious one, slowed the pace further. "We'll need rope support here. I don't want anyone slipping and tumbling down." He took a length of sturdy vine, tying it to a nearby tree and creating a makeshift railing. Each friend held it as they descended, sliding slowly over mossy stones, testing their footing with each careful step. By mid-morning, they encountered their first real obstacle of the day, a narrow waterfall cascading into a shallow but fast-moving pool. The water sparkled under shafts of sunlight, almost beckoning them closer. But its strength was deceptive. Crossing it required strategy. Mahi examined the rocks at the edges, We can use those as stepping stones. But timing will be key. The current is strong and a fall could be dangerous. Tanvir fashioned a small sling with a vine and a carved wooden hook, securing it to a protruding tree root. This can act as a handhold while we cross, he explained, demonstrating by inching across himself. Alan and Bandon followed, testing each stone before stepping, balancing carefully against the current's push. The spray from the waterfall chilled them to the bone, but they persisted, knowing that patience and cooperation were their greatest allies. Once across, they paused to catch their breath and refill water skins from the small rivulet below. The forest seemed almost to exhale in relief at their success, the sound of cascading water blending with the calls of unseen birds and the rustle of leaves. As they continued, the terrain became increasingly challenging. The jungle thickened, vines hung like curtains, and thorny bushes clutched at their clothes and skin. Mahi led the way, sometimes crouching, sometimes crawling, testing each step for stability. The friends communicated in whispers, conserving energy and remaining alert for any signs of predators. By the second day of their descent, hunger began to gnaw more aggressively. Their fish and berries from earlier were nearly gone. Alan suggested scouting for edible plants while Bandon prepared traps for small mammals. Tanvir volunteered to monitor nearby streams for fish. Coordination became essential. Every minute wasted could mean exposure to predators or the risk of missing a food opportunity. They discovered a patch of wild yams and roots partially hidden under fallen leaves. Mahi and Alan worked together to extract them without damaging the surrounding flora. Mindful that the forest's balance was delicate, Bandon set snares along game trails, ensuring each trap was carefully camouflaged and safe from larger animals. Tanvir positioned himself near a small stream, using sharpened sticks as improvised spears to catch fish. By evening, they had enough to prepare a modest meal. The aroma of roasted fish and boiled roots filled the clearing they had chosen for their temporary camp. Their hands were raw, bodies sore, but the satisfaction of survival created a quiet camaraderie. The night brought its own challenges. Shadows moved in the dense underbrush. The cries of nocturnal creatures echoed through the valley, and the distant roar of a predator reminded them of their fragility. Bandon arranged small stick alarms around the camp, each one positioned to snap with the slightest movement. Alan monitored the trees above, alert for snakes or any falling branches. Tanvir maintained the fire, ensuring it did not go out despite the heavy humidity, while Mahi kept watch at the center dot in the dead of night. A sudden rustle near the camp startled them. A pair of glowing eyes reflected the firelight, a wild boar rooting for food. They froze, barely breathing. Bandon whispered, "Stay calm, don't provoke it." The boar, sensing no immediate threat, grunted and retreated into the shadows. Relief swept through the group, but the encounter reinforced the constant vigilance needed in the jungle. The next morning, their path took them through a thicket of bamboo, thick and unyielding. Every step required careful maneuvering. Stems snapped under weight, and the hollow tubes echoed with amplified sounds that could alert predators. Mahi led with a machete, clearing a narrow path, while Tanvir, Alan, and Bandon followed closely, stepping precisely to avoid slipping on fallen leaves or exposed roots. On the fourth day, they reached a small cliff that overlooked a hidden valley. A river meandered far below, and they spotted the faint glint of sunlight reflecting off water, suggesting a fresh water source. The climb down would be treacherous. Loose rocks, slippery moss, and the constant threat of sudden missteps made it a daunting task. Mahi tied the rope securely to a sturdy tree branch and demonstrated how each of them would descend using a combination of rope support and careful foot placement. Go one at a time, he instructed. Communicate every step. If anyone loses balance, hold on tight, and the rest will stabilize. Tanvir went first, gripping the rope tightly, feet probing every inch of rock for stability. Alan followed, whispering encouragements while Bandhan provided rear support, keeping the rope taut and ready. When Mahi descended last, he found all four safe and uninjured, though hearts still raced from the adrenaline. By the 5th day, they were deeply immersed in the hidden valley. Here, the jungle was even more oppressive. Vines intertwined like living chains. The ground was marshy in places, and insects were relentless. They learned to use large leaves as makeshift umbrellas and mosquito barriers. Water was collected from streams using hollowed bamboo sections, filtered with cloth, and boiled for safety. Food acquisition became a refined process. Alan identified edible roots and herbs, some of which could be cooked or eaten raw. Tanvir crafted small fishing spears from branches, improving on his earlier designs. Bandhan set snares with enhanced camouflage, and Mahi coordinated efforts, ensuring every member's energy was optimized. They developed routines: morning scouting for food, midday climbing or navigating treacherous terrain, and evening preparation of meals and camp defenses. On the 6th day, they encountered a dense fog that hung low in the valley, reducing visibility to mere meters. Every movement required extreme caution. A misstep could lead to a fall or losing the trail entirely. They held hands intermittently, whispered directions, and moved at a pace dictated by the slowest member. The fog heightened every sound: dripping water, snapping twigs, the distant roar of unseen animals. 7th day challenges included a sudden thunderstorm. Torrential rain turned the ground to mud, and small rivulets became rushing streams. They constructed temporary shelters using branches and large leaves, securing them against the wind. The cold and wet conditions tested their endurance, but teamwork ensured no one succumbed to exhaustion or hypothermia. By the 8th day, their bodies had hardened. Blisters had become calloused, muscles toned from constant climbing and crawling, and their reflexes sharper. They had learned to anticipate environmental changes, sudden weather shifts, animal movement, and treacherous terrain. The forest had become both adversary and teacher, molding them into capable survivors. 9th day brought the ultimate test. A steep cliff face partially washed out by previous rains, leading to a waterfall-fed gorge. Mahi, Tanvir, Alan, and Bandhan evaluated the situation meticulously. They used ropes, vines, and strategically placed stones for stability, moving one by one. The descent was slow, painstaking, and mentally exhausting. Every step required trust in the others and in their own judgment. Finally, on the 10th day, after navigating the gorge and crossing another narrow waterfall pool, they reached a hidden glade. The sun broke through the canopy, illuminating a small, calm river, patches of edible plants, and a relatively flat area perfect for camping. Exhaustion, hunger, and relief washed over them. They had endured 10 days of relentless challenges, steep climbs, dense undergrowth, torrential rains, cold nights, wild animals, and the constant mental strain of making decisions that could mean life or death. Mahi finally spoke, voice raw but firm. "We made it through 10 days in the jungle. We've learned more than survival. We've learned patience, resilience, and teamwork." Tanvir nodded, smiling despite fatigue. "And the jungle has tested us in ways we never imagined. We know now that every movement, every choice, every step matters," Alan added quietly. "We've learned to respect it, to read its signs, and to anticipate its dangers. Alone, we would have failed. Together, we survived." Bandon leaned against a tree, surveying the valley. "These 10 days have changed us. Stronger, wiser, more aware, and we've done it as a team. Nothing can take that from us." They collapsed together near the riverbank, sharing a modest meal. Their laughter soft but genuine. The forest around them hummed with live birds, insects, rustling leaves, but they were no longer strangers. They had adapted, survived, and learned. The jungle had tested their limits and had rewarded their courage and cooperation. By nightfall, as stars began to pierce the forest canopy, they settled near the river, exhausted but triumphant, knowing that the jungle had forged not just their bodies, but their spirits. Every misstep, every scrape, every sleepless night had become part of their story, a testament to endurance, skill, and the strength of friendship under the harshest of conditions. Scene 6. The forest around them seemed almost alive in a new way as Mahi, Tanvir, Alan, and Bandon continued their descent into the deeper jungle valleys. The thick canopy filtered the sunlight, casting fragmented patterns of light and shadow on the uneven forest floor. Each step was deliberate, every motion measured. The forest, while beautiful, was merciless to carelessness. By mid-morning, the group encountered a steep rocky incline that led toward a hidden waterfall, cascading down into a narrow gorge. The rocks were slick with moss and remnants of morning dew, making each step treacherous. Mahi paused, assessing the safest path. "We'll need to use the ropes here," he said. "Move slowly, communicate every step, and watch for loose stones." Tanvir secured one end of a rope to a sturdy tree, testing its stability before motioning for Alan to lead the descent. Alan's eyes scanned the terrain carefully, identifying handholds and footholds while whispering instructions. Bandon followed closely behind, ensuring the rope remained taut, ready to catch anyone who slipped. Mahi brought up the rear, stabilizing the rope and observing each movement. The descent was slow and exhausting. Wet leaves clung to their boots, roots threatened to trip them, and the roar of the waterfall masked the subtle sounds of shifting rocks. Each misstep could have been fatal, but the group's cohesion, built over the previous 10 days, allowed them to navigate the slope without incident. Their trust in one another had become their greatest weapon. At the base of the waterfall, they found a small pool fed by the cascading water. The water was crystal clear, offering both a source of hydration and a place to cleanse themselves after hours of grueling navigation. Tanvir knelt at the edge, filling their water skins, while Alan examined the surrounding vegetation for edible plants. Mahi scanned the area for signs of wildlife, cautious of predators that might be drawn to the water. Bandon, ever vigilant, checked the perimeter, and set small twig alarms to alert them of movement. By midday, they began navigating a thick jungle path along the gorge. Vines hung from above, thorny bushes scratched at exposed skin, and uneven terrain slowed their progress. Each movement required focus and patience. Tanvir's hands were blistered from gripping ropes, Alan's legs were scratched from underbrush, and Bandon's back ached from carrying supplies. Mahi's boots were caked in mud, yet his eyes remained sharp, always searching for safer footing. The forest was alive with unseen creatures. Birds called from high branches, insects swarmed in clouds, and the distant growl of a predator reminded them that they were never truly alone. Yet, amidst the danger, there were moments of beauty, a delicate orchid clinging to a tree trunk, sunlight piercing the canopy to illuminate a small fern, the rainbow cast across the waterfall mist. These glimpses gave them hope and reminded them why they had ventured into the jungle. On the second day of navigating the gorge, hunger began to press more insistently. Their previous catch had been consumed, and edible plants were scarce along the rocky paths. Alan suggested foraging near the riverbank, while Mahi and Tanvir scouted for fish. Bandon prepared snares along animal tracks, camouflaging them carefully. Hours of careful observation paid off. Alan discovered a patch of wild yams hidden among rocks and ferns. Tanvir managed to spear a small fish from a shallow pool, using a sharpened stick and precise timing. Bandon's snares caught a rabbit, its struggle brief and humane. Together, they cooked a modest meal using small flames built from dry moss and twigs, savoring the hard-earned food. That evening, the first challenge of nightfall arrived. The dense canopy blocked most moonlight, plunging their camp into near darkness. Strange calls echoed from the forest, the shrill cry of a nocturnal bird, the rustle of leaves as small mammals moved, the distant growl of something larger. Every shadow seemed to shift and breathe, heightening their awareness. Bandhan arranged sharpened sticks in a perimeter around their temporary shelter, while Alan set up twig alarms that would snap if disturbed. Tanvir maintained the fire, careful to prevent it from extinguishing in the humid night air. Mahi took the first watch, listening intently to the forest sounds, noting anything unusual. During the night, the rustle of underbrush alerted them, for glowing eyes reflected the firelight. Wild boars, curious and searching for food. Bandon whispered, "Stay calm, don't provoke them." They remained motionless, barely breathing. After several tense minutes, the animals moved on, disappearing into the shadows. Relief washed over the group, but the encounter underscored the constant vigilance required in the jungle. The following morning, they continued along the gorge, navigating increasingly steep cliffs and slippery moss-covered stones. Each movement required coordination. Mahi tested each foothold. Tanvir helped steady Alan when she lost balance, and Bandon monitored the rope and surrounding terrain. Communication was constant, whispered guidance ensuring that each step was precise. By the fourth day, the friends discovered a hidden cave nestled behind a secondary waterfall. Its entrance was narrow, but the interior offered protection from both rain and predators. They entered cautiously, inspecting for snakes, insects, or other threats. Once satisfied, they cleared debris and set up a small fire. The aroma of cooking fish and roasted roots filled the cave, offering a rare moment of comfort in the harsh wilderness. The nights were long and filled with challenges. Rainstorms tested the integrity of their shelter, Wind threatened to extinguish fires, and cold seeped into their bones. Yet, each difficulty reinforced their reliance on one another. Mahi organized watch rotations. Tanvir ensured fire and water supply. Alan monitored for edible plants and potential threats, and Bandon maintained perimeter safety. Their teamwork had evolved into an almost instinctive coordination. On the sixth day, they faced an unexpected obstacle, a narrow passage blocked by a fallen tree spanning the gorge. The trunk was slick with moss, and a misstep could result in a fall into the rushing water below. Mahi led the way, balancing carefully, using a rope anchored to a nearby tree for safety. Tanvir followed, then Alan and Bandon. Every step required precision, courage, and trust in one another. The descent was exhausting, but no one faltered. By the seventh day, the forest began to reveal hidden resources. Alan discovered a cluster of edible mushrooms safely tucked under fallen logs. Tanvir found a small pool teeming with fish, easily caught with sharpened sticks. Bandon identified animal trails leading to fresh water, and Mahi coordinated their movements to maximize efficiency while conserving energy. Survival was no longer chaotic. It had become a deliberate, methodical process. The eighth day brought another night of heavy rainfall. Their shelter offered partial protection, but water seeped through leaves and moss, soaking their clothing and chilling them to the bone. Bandon monitored for hypothermia. Tanvir tended to the fire, and Alan and Mahi managed food preparation. Despite discomfort, their morale remained high. They had faced for worse and survived. By the ninth day, their bodies had adapted. Muscles were conditioned to climbing, crawling, and balancing. Reflexes sharpened to detect unstable footing and hidden dangers. And mental resilience had strengthened through constant vigilance. Each sunrise brought renewed determination. The jungle remained unforgiving, but they were no longer passive participants. They had become active learners and skilled navigators. On the 10th day, after nearly 2 weeks of relentless challenges, they reached a plateau above a calm river. Sunlight broke through the canopy, illuminating a relatively flat area suitable for camping. Exhausted, covered in mud, scratches, and bruises, they shared a modest meal of fish, roots, and berries. Mahi finally spoke, his voice low but firm. 10 days in this harsh terrain. We've survived everything the forest could throw at us, and we've done it together. Tanvir nodded, exhaustion evident on his face. The forest has tested us physically, mentally, and emotionally, but we're stronger for it. Alan added quietly, we've learned to read the forest, anticipate danger, and work as a team. Every step, every decision mattered. Bandon looked out over the river, muscles aching, but spirit strong. We've endured storms, animals, cliffs, and fear itself. And yet, we are still here, together. They settled near the riverbank, exhaustion mixing with relief and pride. The jungle round them hummed with life. But the four friends no longer felt like intruders. They were survivors, shaped and tested by the forest's challenges. Every scar, blister, and sleepless night had become part of their story, a testament to resilience, courage, and the unwavering strength of friendship under the harshest conditions. The jungle grew darker and denser as Mahi, Tanvir, Alan, and Bandon pressed onward. The plateau they had reached the previous night had offered some respite, but beyond it lay uncharted territory, a maze of dense underbrush, sharp ridges, and hidden valleys that seemed to stretch endlessly. Every movement required focus. Every sound could signal a predator or a hidden threat. The morning fog clung to the forest floor, wrapping around their legs like silent fingers. Mahi led, using a sharpened stick to part the thick vines and test the ground ahead. Tanvir followed, adjusting the pack straps to maintain balance on the uneven terrain. Alan's eyes darted in every direction, noting subtle animal tracks and listening for water sources. Bandon brought up the rear, ensuring no one was separated or distracted. By mid-morning, they came across a narrow gorge. A swift stream ran through it, fed by the highlands they had previously scaled. The rocks around it were slick with moss, and the current was deceptively strong. Mahi paused, studying the route. "We'll have to jump across or use those rocks as stepping stones," he said, pointing to a series of moss-covered boulders partially submerged. Alan tested the first stone with her foot. It wobbled slightly, water lapping at its edges. "Careful," she warned. "The next one is less stable." Tanvir followed her lead, moving slowly and deliberately, while Bandon held a vine taut as a safety line. Mahi crossed last, using the rope and careful balance, ensuring all were safe before moving onward. As they progressed, the forest seemed alive with unseen eyes. The distant calls of predators echoed through the valleys, blending with the chirping of insects and the rustle of leaves. Every snap of a twig or shift in the underbrush made them pause. They had become acutely aware of the subtle signals the jungle offered. The bend of a branch, a faint footprint, the ripple of water indicating movement upstream. On the second day, hunger and fatigue began to weigh heavily. Their last meal had been modest, and edible plants were scarce along the rocky gorge. Alan suggested scouting for small animals while Tanvir and Mahi monitored the stream for fish. Bandon set snares along likely paths for rabbits or small mammals. Every catch was hard-earned. A misstep or hasty movement could spook prey or attract predators. Hours passed as they moved cautiously. Finally, Alan spotted a small family of rabbits near a dense patch of underbrush. Whispering, she directed Mahi to approach with a simple snare, Tanvir keeping watch for disturbances, and Bandon ready to intervene if needed. The snare worked perfectly, and the rabbit was caught swiftly and humanely. Their morale lifted slightly with the success, but the forest offered no leniency. The challenge was constant. By evening, they set up a camp near a bend in the stream. The dense canopy allowed only slivers of sunlight to reach the ground, leaving much of the area in shadow. They built a small fire, careful to prevent smoke from rising too high and attracting attention. The aroma of roasted rabbit filled the air, offering a brief but vital comfort. Night in the jungle brought an entirely new set of challenges. Sounds amplified in the darkness: the distant roar of a predator, the snapping of branches, the sudden flutter of wings overhead. Bandon arranged sharpened sticks around the camp, and Alan set up small twig alarms that would snap if disturbed. Mahi and Tanvir alternated watch shifts, listening for movement and observing the shadows. Around midnight, they heard the rustle of underbrush closer this time, for glowing eyes reflected the firelight, revealing a pack of wild boars searching for food. The friends froze, barely breathing. Bandon whispered instructions. "Stay calm. Don't make sudden movements. Let them pass." Slowly, without panicking, they remained still. The boars grunted, sniffed the ground, and eventually retreated into the shadows. Relief washed over them, but it was a stark reminder that danger was constant. The next morning, the terrain became increasingly treacherous. Narrow ridges, loose rocks, and thick thorny vines slowed their progress. Mahi led with caution, testing every foothold, while Tanvir assisted Alan and Bandon, stabilizing them as needed. Communication was constant, quiet, and deliberate. The friends moved almost as a single organism, each anticipating the other's needs and actions. By the fourth day, they reached a hidden waterfall cascading into a deep, mist-filled pool. The surrounding rocks were slick, and a direct descent would be dangerous. Mahi assessed the route carefully. We'll need ropes and teamwork. Go one at a time. Communicate every step. Tanvir secured one end of a rope to a sturdy tree, demonstrating the descent first. Alan followed, whispering instructions, while Bandon and Mahi ensured the rope was stable and that every movement was controlled. The process was slow and mentally exhausting, but no one faltered. Their trust in each other, honed over previous days of hardship, allowed them to navigate the waterfall safely. Food remained a pressing concern. They foraged for edible plants along the stream, identified small fish using sharpened sticks, and set snares for rabbits or other small mammals. Every catch required patience, observation, and precise execution. Alan discovered edible roots tucked under moss-covered stones. Tanvir managed fishing attempts, Bandon maintained traps, and Mahi coordinated efforts to maximize efficiency while conserving energy. The seventh day brought heavy rainfall. Torrential rain turned the gorge into a treacherous labyrinth of mud and rushing water. Their fire risked extinguishing. Pathways became slippery and hypothermia threatened. They huddled under large leaves and branches, using rocks to shield themselves from direct downpour. Teamwork became critical. Mahi stabilized rocks. Tanvir maintained water and fire. Alan monitored food and safety, and Bandon ensured perimeter security. By the eighth day, they had adapted to the relentless jungle. Reflexes sharpened, senses heightened, and their bodies conditioned to constant movement, climbing, and balance. They were now deeply attuned to the forest's rhythms. Sudden bird calls indicated approaching animals. Subtle rustles warned of predators, and shifts in wind or water signaled environmental changes. On the ninth day, they faced a narrow cliffside ledge overlooking a rushing river. Loose rocks and slick moss made each step dangerous. Mahi, Tanvir, Alan, and Bandon coordinated movements precisely, using ropes, handholds, and careful observation. Every foot placement, every handhold, every whispered instruction mattered. The descent was painstaking, but no one was injured, demonstrating the culmination of lessons learned over days of survival. Finally, on the 10th day, after navigating dense underbrush, cliffs, waterfalls, and rivers, they reached a hidden glade bathed in sunlight. The area offered calm water, edible plants, and a flat expanse suitable for camping. Exhaustion weighed heavily, but relief and pride washed over them. They had endured 10 days of extreme challenges, treacherous terrain, unpredictable weather, dangerous animals, and relentless mental strain. I spoke first. Voice Robert steady. We've survived 10 days in the jungle, not just surviving but learning, adapting, and thriving together. This is more than endurance, it's growth. Tanvir nodded, exhaustion evident, but spirit intact. We've learned the forest's language, its warnings and its opportunities. Every step, every choice mattered. Alan added softly, we've survived through patience, observation, and cooperation. Alone, we would have failed. Together, we prevailed. Bandon, surveying the hidden glade, muscles aching but proud, said, the jungle tested us physically, mentally, and emotionally. We are stronger, wiser, and more capable because of it. And we did it as a team. They settled near the calm river, sharing a modest meal, reflecting on their journey. The jungle around them hummed with life, but they were no longer mere visitors, they were survivors, having faced and overcome challenges that demanded every ounce of strength, skill, and teamwork. Every blister, scratch, sleepless night, and careful decision had become part of their story, a testament to resilience, courage, and the enduring power of friendship in the heart of the wild. The sun was just beginning to rise, spilling golden light across the dense canopy when Mahi, Tanvir, Alan, and Bandon prepared for what would be their final stretch through the jungle. The plateau and hidden glade they had discovered the previous day had offered some respite, but beyond it lay the most challenging terrain yet. An uncharted network of cliffs, river crossings, and thick jungle that had the capacity to test every lesson they had learned over the past 10 days. Mahi led, his eyes sharp and calculating. The forest, though familiar now, still held countless dangers. Stay close, he whispered, and communicate constantly. Every step matters. The path might look clear, but traps, loose soil, and wild animals are everywhere. Tanvir adjusted his pack, which had grown heavy with the supplies they carried. We're near the river again, he noted, pointing toward a winding stream below the cliffs. If we descend carefully, we can use it to guide us toward the edge of the jungle. But the slope is steep, and the rocks are loose. One misstep could be serious. Alan scanned the terrain ahead. There's a narrow ledge, she said, with enough footholds for careful movement. The vines can help stabilize us, but we need to move one at a time. Bandon, ever cautious, secured a long rope to a sturdy tree near the cliff, checking every knot multiple times. Safety first, he murmured. No rushing, no shortcuts. The descent was grueling. Each step demanded focus. Moss-covered rocks threatened to slip underfoot. Hidden roots twisted like snares, and the constant roar of the nearby river reminded them of the consequences of error. Mahi led, testing each foot and handhold. Tanvir followed closely, supporting Alan when she lost balance. Bandon monitored the rope tension and ensured the integrity of every knot. By mid-morning, they reached the river's edge. Its waters flowed rapidly, fed by upstream waterfalls and heavy rainfall from the previous nights. Crossing it was unavoidable. The other side offered a relatively flat expanse that led to safer ground. Mahi examined the river carefully. The current is strong, but we can use the stones and fallen logs. Take it slow and communicate every step. Alan went first, using a partially submerged log as a bridge. Her movements were deliberate, arms outstretched to maintain balance. Tanvir followed, gripping her hand for stability. Bandon's cautious approach ensured that the rope line would catch anyone who slipped. Mahi brought up the rear, observing closely, ready to react instantly. The crossing took nearly an hour. each member moving carefully to avoid the rushing current that could sweep them downstream. On the far bank, they paused to rest and take stock. Blisters, cuts, and fatigue had accumulated, but so had resilience. Their muscles ached, but the mental fortitude that had grown over the past 10 days now carried them forward. They drank cautiously from the river, boiled water, and collected edible plants along the bank. This small meal was modest, but in that moment, it was a vital reinforcement of both body and spirit. The afternoon brought another challenge, a dense thicket of thorny bushes, intertwined with vines, creating a near impenetrable barrier. Mahi took the lead, using his machete to carve a path. Each swing required precision. One misstep could injure him or damage vital supplies. Tanvir and Alan followed, cutting smaller vines and clearing debris. Vanden assisted from the rear, removing obstacles and ensuring no one was left behind. By evening, the group reached a ridge overlooking the final stretch of jungle, before the boundary of known terrain. From here, the canopy opened slightly, revealing distant hills and the faint glimmer of a clearing that signaled the edge of the forest. The sight brought relief, but also a renewed caution. They had survived countless trials, but the jungle's last test was often the most deceptive. Night approached, and they set up a temporary camp on the ridge. The stars emerged through gaps in the canopy, casting a soft glow across the forest. The air was cool but carried the scent of damp earth and vegetation. Exhausted but vigilant, they prepared a modest fire, cooking the last of their supplies. They shared stories, laughter, and silent reflection, knowing that tomorrow would mark the culmination of their journey. In the dead of night, a distant roar echoed through the valley. A predator, likely a jaguar or large feline, patrolled the jungle floor. Every muscle tensed instinctively. Vanden quietly checked the twig alarms, ensuring nothing was disturbed. Tanvir maintained the fire, small but vital for both warmth and protection. Alan monitored shadows near the edge of the ridge, while Mahi kept watch, eyes scanning every movement. Despite exhaustion, their vigilance was unwavering. Morning came, bringing with it the final challenge, a steep descent through loose soil, and rocks leading to a narrow path that would take them to the edge of the jungle. Mahi led, testing every step carefully. Tanvir and Alan followed in sequence, gripping vines and branches for stability. Vanden maintained the rope, ready to catch any slip. Their movements were deliberate, synchronized, and precise, reflecting the culmination of everything they had learned over the previous 10 days. Hours passed in careful navigation. Sweat poured, muscles burned, and mental fatigue pressed heavily. But the group pushed forward relentlessly. Each step brought them closer to safety, but also tested their endurance, coordination, and trust in one another. By late afternoon, they reached a small clearing marking the edge of the jungle. The dense underbrush gave way to open grassland, and the forest canopy finally allowed the sun to illuminate the terrain fully. Relief, exhaustion, and triumph surged through the friends. They had survived 10 days of extreme challenges. Cliffs, rivers, waterfalls, dense underbrush, predators, storms, and relentless mental strain. Mahi spoke first, voice raw but firm. "We made it. 10 days in the jungle, and we've come out stronger, wiser, and more capable than we ever imagined." Tanvir nodded, a small smile breaking through exhaustion. "We've survived the jungle's tests, learned its secrets, And most importantly, we've relied on each other every step of the way, Alan added softly. The jungle taught us patience, observation, and teamwork. Every misstep could have been fatal, but together we prevailed. Bandon looked around, muscles sore, but proud. We've endured storms, predators, exhaustion, and fear. We've pushed past our limits and survived. That's a victory no one can take from us. They rested on the clearing's edge, looking back at the jungle that had tested them so thoroughly. The dense, dark forest that had seemed impenetrable 10 days ago now appeared almost familiar. Each scar, blister, and sleepless night had become a symbol of endurance, courage, and teamwork. The journey had changed them, forging not just their bodies, but their minds and spirits as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the grassland. The four friends prepared to leave the jungle behind. They walked together, side by side, carrying memories, lessons, and the quiet pride of surviving one of the most challenging experiences of their lives. The forest receded behind them, but the strength, trust, and resilience they had cultivated within it would remain forever. They had emerged not just as survivors, but as a cohesive team whose bonds had been tested and proven unbreakable. Every challenge faced, every fear confronted, every moment of exhaustion and triumph had become part of their story, a story of endurance, friendship, and the unyielding power of the human spirit in the face of nature's most relentless trials. The first rays of dawn barely illuminated the edge of the jungle, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Mahi, Tanvir, Alan, and Bandon had spent 10 grueling days navigating treacherous cliffs, rivers, waterfalls, and dense thickets. Every muscle in their bodies ached, every limb was bruised, and yet their spirits remained unbroken. The jungle behind them was no longer just a collection of trees and rivers, it was a teacher, a trial, and a crucible that had forged their endurance and camaraderie. Mahi led the group toward the faint outline of a distant clearing. "Stay alert," he whispered. "Even near the edge, the jungle hides dangers. Loose rocks, sudden slopes, and wildlife are still a risk." The friends moved cautiously, their footsteps measured, eyes scanning for subtle changes in the terrain. Tanvir adjusted his pack, now lighter from rationed supplies. "We're almost there. Just a few more ridges before we reach open land," he said, though the strain in his voice betrayed the exhaustion that weighed on him. Alan's gaze remained sharp, noting every rock, vine, and shadow that could pose a threat. Bandon brought up the rear, checking each step and ensuring the rope and safety lines were secured. By mid-morning, they encountered a narrow, fast-flowing stream cutting across their path. Mahi assessed it carefully. "We can cross here, but we'll need precise timing and careful footing," he said. The current was deceptively strong, and the rocks were slippery with moss. Alan went first, using a narrow submerged log to balance herself, while Tanvir followed closely, gripping her hand. Bandon ensured the rope remained taut, and Mahi brought up the rear, ready to react instantly to any slip. Once across, they paused briefly to drink and rest. Hunger had been their constant companion, and the last remnants of fish, roots, and berries had been consumed in previous days. Yet, the satisfaction of surviving another difficult passage provided a surge of renewed energy. The sun had climbed higher, casting golden beams across the dense canopy and hinting at the safety beyond the forest. The final stretch was mentally and physically taxing. A steep ridge awaited them, its surface loose and prone to sliding. Mahi tested each foothold before stepping, signaling for the others to follow in careful sequence. Tanvir supported Alan when she stumbled slightly, and Bandhan secured the rope for added stability. The trust they had built over 10 days became their lifeline. Each step was deliberate, every movement synchronized, a ballet of endurance and coordination. By late afternoon, they reached the edge of the forest. The dense trees gave way to open grasslands, sunlight spilling onto their faces, warming their exhausted bodies. Relief, exhilaration, and disbelief mingled in their expressions. They had survived 10 days in the heart of the jungle, facing unpredictable terrain, extreme weather, and constant threat from wildlife. Mahi, his voice hoarse but firm, broke the silence. We did it. 10 days of relentless challenge, and we came out alive and stronger than before. This is not just survival, it's transformation. Tanvir sank onto a rock, muscles trembling from exertion, and nodded. The jungle tested us in every way, physically, mentally, emotionally. But we made it. Together. Alan, brushing mud and leaves from her clothes, added softly, "We've learned to anticipate danger, to work as a team, and to trust ourselves and each other. Every misstep could have been fatal, but together we overcame." Bandhan looked across the open grassland, chest heaving, exhaustion evident, but pride shining in his eyes. "We've endured storms, predators, exhaustion, and fear. We've pushed past every limit and survived. That's a victory no one can take away." They set up a temporary camp at the forest's edge, tending to minor wounds and resting their weary bodies. Water from a nearby stream was boiled, and a modest meal was prepared from the last of their supplies. As they ate, silence settled, not the silence of fear or uncertainty, but of accomplishment, reflection, and profound relief. The evening sky turned shades of orange and pink. Mahi gazed at the horizon. "We've completed what many would consider impossible. The jungle could have broken us, but instead it made us stronger. Every scar, every blister, every sleepless night was worth it." Tanvir leaned back, staring at the sky, and said quietly, "It's more than survival. We've learned patience, resilience, and the value of teamwork. Alone, none of us could have made it." Alan and Bandhan shared a glance, smiling despite exhaustion. "And we've learned trust," Alan added. "Trust in ourselves, in the environment, and in each other. That's the greatest lesson of all." Night fell, but the sense of danger that had dominated the jungle was gone. The stars sparkled above. The gentle rustling of grass replaced the relentless sounds of unseen predators. For the first time in 10 days, they slept without fear, resting their bodies and minds fully. The next morning, they began their final walk towards civilization. The terrain was now manageable, but their bodies still carried the fatigue of their ordeal. Every step was a reminder of how far they had come, how much they had endured, and how much they had grown. The friendships forged in adversity were unbreakable. The shared experiences of struggle and survival had created bonds stronger than any challenge. They might face again. By midday, they reached the edge of a small village, the sight of cultivated fields and human activity bringing both relief and a strange sense of awe. The forest behind them, once overwhelming and menacing, now appeared almost serene in its distance. They had emerged not just as survivors, but as individuals transformed by the intensity of their journey. Mahi turned to the group, exhaustion and triumph in his eyes. We made it. We survived the jungle. But more than that, we've proven to ourselves that we can endure, adapt, and succeed even in the harshest conditions. Tanvir laughed softly, a sound of pure relief. I never thought we'd make it through some of those nights. But here we are, stronger, wiser, and together. Alan smiled, brushing dirt from her hair. Every challenge, every fear, every sleepless night worth it. We've learned more than survival. We've learned life itself. Bandon looked back toward the jungle one last time. His voice soft but firm. The jungle tested our bodies, minds, and spirits. We've survived, we've grown, and we'll never forget these 10 days. This is the story we'll carry forever. And with that, the four friends stepped into the village, leaving the jungle behind. Their journey had been a crucible of endurance, resilience, and friendship. Every scar, every exhaustion, and every challenge had become part of their story, a story of survival, transformation, and the unbreakable power of human spirit and teamwork. The forest behind them whispered in the wind, carrying memories of struggle, triumph, and lessons learned. They had faced the impossible and emerged victorious. The journey had ended, but its impact would remain forever, shaping who they were, how they viewed the world, and how they approached every challenge ahead. As the sun set over the village, casting a warm glow across fields and homes, the four friends rested, triumphant, and forever changed. Their journey through the heart of the jungle had ended, but their story of endurance, friendship, and survival would live on, not just in memory, but in the spirit of every challenge they would face henceforth.